It's now time to welcome today's keynote speaker, Dr. Richard Manang, who will share his views on the built environment and climate action, from regulation to opportunity, an urgent paradigm for accelerated progress towards net zero emissions. Dr. Richard Manang is currently the Africa Region Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Program, UNEP. He's responsible for guiding the implementation of UNEP's Climate Resilience Development Strategy at national and regional levels. Dr. Manang's experience encompasses a unique blend in programming and policy on regional and global issues of climate change policy, environmental management, sustainable development, clean energy, resource efficiency, and food security from the lens of accelerated economic growth. He's also participated in a wide variety of research projects and has published over 500 articles in international peer-reviewed journals and magazines. Time permits, we'll conduct a short Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat for Dr. Manang to address at the conclusion of the keynote. The winners in the Performance Leadership and Climate Champions categories will be announced after the keynote. I'd now like to acknowledge keynote sponsor, president, founder of Equity ICI Real Estate Services, and invite him to say a few words to welcome today's very special guest.
A very special thank you to keynote sponsor, Equity ICI Real Estate Services, and a warm welcome to Randall Frobelius, President and Founder at Equity ICI Real Estate Services Limited.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Crest Awards. My name is Randall Frobelius, and I'm President and General Manager of Equity ICI Real Estate Services and the Chair-elect of BOMA International. Equity ICI provides property management, development, and construction services to commercial and residential property owners in the Greater Toronto Area. We are highly committed to collaborating with our clients to support their sustainability and ESG goals while ensuring the highest possible tenant experience. Equity ICI has both supported and has been a participant in the Race2Reduce since its launch in 2017. We've witnessed its popularity and growth since then, and it's great to see over 3,000 buildings and tenant spaces are now enrolled. Congratulations to all of this year's participants and award candidates. Although the race focuses on Ontario, its impact is felt globally. And over the past couple of years, we've been very fortunate to engage renowned agents of change as our Crest Awards keynote speakers. This year is no different. We are extremely honored to welcome Dr. Richard Manang, the United Nations Environment Programme's Climate Change Program Coordinator for Africa, here with us today. Thank you, Dr. Manang, for accepting our invitation and for joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya. After Dr. Manang's presentation, we will have time for a few questions. Please use the chat feature to ask your questions. We will get to as many as we can. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Manang.
Thank you very much, Randall, the organizers of the Race2Reduce, all participants and winners of the 2021 Crest Award, and the entire BOMA Toronto community. It is a great pleasure to join you today for this award ceremony. Not everyone who chased the zebra caught it, but he who caught it chased it. This African proverb analogizes a critical attribute that precedes success in any venture, and is summed up in two words: taking chances. And this is my message to you today. The built environment sector players globally urgently need to take chances and seize opportunities in the fast approaching dynamic shift towards net zero and more just economies of the figure. About 35 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published the 2021 Physical Science Basis Report. This report has been called a good rate for humanity, and the findings of this report shows that the world is likely to breach the safe 1.5 degrees threshold in just about 2 decades from today, and this will result in more escalations of climate risk whose costs to the global economy are already at breaking point. In 2020 alone, climate change-induced disasters cost the global economy up to $210 billion. North America experienced double the cost of damages compared to 2019. There were 22 separate billion-dollar climate disasters across North America, shattering the previous annual records of 16 events in 2011 and 2017. The frequency of these events has given rise to increased cases of location stigma, where clients avoid properties in perceived high-risk areas, resulting in values falling by up to 25%. And one of the scary findings of the IPCC is that for every 1 degree warming, extreme daily precipitation events will intensify by 7%. With such projections, the likelihood of valuable real estate being underwater and devaluing in the next few years is not far-fetched. The implications of this risk are threefold. One, no sector is immune to the devastating effects of the changing climate, and collective effort is irreplaceable. Two, achieving net zero emissions is the best insurance against an unraveling of costly economic-wide risk. Globally, unmitigated climate change will mean a reduction of incomes by an average of 23%, which would mean a significant reduction in purchasing power, shrinkage in real estate markets, and a decline in property value. Three, the race towards net emissions needs to take care of the most vulnerable in society. Unmitigated climate change, as we already know, will hit the weakest in society, the hardest, as incomes of the poorest is expected to shrink by a whopping 75% against a global average of 23%. This means that efforts toward net zero must be in the context of creating inclusive socioeconomic opportunities for the most vulnerable to bring about the much needed just transition to greener economies. But how the real estate can transition justly towards net zero emissions must now become our priority and our own fierce urgency of now. What we know is that the other side of the coin of these vulnerabilities is equally unpleasant. The real estate sector has one of the highest carbon footprints, contributing up to 40% of global emissions. The risk of these emissions, which compound the changing climate, affect the building sector and contribute to the skyrocketing vulnerability of the weakest in society. Globally, the real estate sector needs to reduce its emission by 50% to contribute effectively towards net zero by 2050. In Canada, building emissions account for 17% of the country's total emissions. This makes the real estate industry a key player in the country's effort to cut its emissions by up to 45% in less than 9 years from today towards achieving the net zero emissions target by 2050. However, the real question that all of us need to ask today and also need to answer is how the process of cutting these emissions can actually unlock more lucrative investment opportunities for the real estate industry as we drive inclusive socio-economic growth. This calls for the operationalization of 4 fundamental principles. And the first principle is that we must prioritize green building investments to unlock environmental, social, and financial dividends. It is estimated that green buildings represent one of the largest global investment opportunities of the next 10 years, projected to reach an estimated $24.7 trillion in just 9 years from today. This is to say that real estate developers will enhance their chances of mobilizing and attracting capital by integrating green principles in their development. In addition, green buildings, whether new or renovated, attract a 7% increase in asset value over conventional buildings. And this is to say that for a developer aiming for rapid appreciation of the asset, the green building is the way to go. On operational costs, green buildings have been shown to use 50% less energy and between 11 to 50% less water than conventional buildings, a direct reduction in property management costs and boost of profitability. This is in addition to producing 62% fewer emissions and contributing significantly to the macroeconomic growth of an economy. In Canada, as we speak today, Green buildings have been shown to create more jobs than the oil, than the gas, mining, and forestry sectors combined. And going forward, it is estimated that Canada's green building sector can contribute 1.5 million jobs, $150 billion in GDP in just 9 years, while cutting emissions by 53 megatons compared with 2018 levels. On the social front, considering that the average person spends 90% of their time inside buildings, people working in green, well-ventilated offices with better indoor air quality record a 101% increase in cognitive scores and 8% improvements in performance. Therefore, green buildings make business sense. Green buildings make business sense and register cross-cutting benefits on the environment, macroeconomics, and society at large. And that takes me to the second point. We must stay ahead of regulation. As the race to net zero emissions continues, to gather steam, governments across the globe are instituting legislation to curtail emissions in line with meeting their net zero targets. In Canada, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, for the first time, makes accountable emission reduction part of the law. Complying with such regulations may prove to be costly if unplanned and may shrink profitability. But this is the point. Firms that will succeed with environmental regulations will need to change their business perspective. Rather than look at environmental standards as regulations to be endured, they look at these standards as a source of future investments and market growth. With this change in perspective comes a reorientation of investment and marketing strategies, where focus shifts from ordinary markets and investments to niche markets and investments that place a premium on greening and sustainability. By so doing, they stay ahead of the regulation curve by reorienting their businesses towards greener pathways for the purposes of tapping market growth opportunities. For example, a TripAdvisor survey indicated that 79% of travelers said implementing eco-friendly practices is important to their choice of accommodation. Over 90% of green building occupants are satisfied with the quality of their indoor environment compared to only 50% of conventional buildings. Surveys also indicate that up to 15% of stock market investors invest exclusively in companies with credible environmental sustainability track records, leveraging these market benefits to remain ahead of the regulation curve rather than being caught up by regulation is therefore a big plus for real estate globally as the race towards net zero heats up. That takes me to the third point. We need to diversify into affordable housing. It is estimated that 300 million additional homes or houses will be needed globally by 2030 to ensure adequate housing for all. This implies a gap of 20 million housing units needed every year by low-income, highly vulnerable members of society. How the building industry can decarbonize to minimize emissions that are responsible for harming some of the most vulnerable in society, including through extreme events of floods, droughts, heat waves that have become more commonplace, while bridging the glaring housing gap provides the most promising pathway for the real estate industry to contribute to a much needed global just transition to low carbon pathways. And I am not speaking of charity here alone, but rather a prioritization of investments in green affordable housing that are accessible to the vulnerable and unhoused. Simple strategies such as prioritizing recycle and reuse building material can lower housing development costs by 40% alongside a significant reduction in the carbon footprint. Working with low-risk financing institutions that are accessible to some of these low-income earners, such as cooperatives, can further de-risk this market segment for increased investment. Globally, as we speak today, cooperatives provide over 100 million jobs, which is 20% more than multinational enterprises, a fact that indicates their economic strength. And that takes me to the fourth point. Energy efficiency should become our standard bearer. Yes, it should. While the real estate sector globally consumes over 50% of global energy, making energy the most significant source of building emissions, investments in energy efficiency remain very low. It is estimated that for every $1 spent on energy efficiency, 37 dollars is spent on conventional construction approaches. Therefore, achieving energy efficiency needs to be a critical standard for the building sector, push towards net zero emissions. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, these principles that I've enumerated today, that I've shared with you, cannot be actualized without the full exercise of non-policy incentives. I am talking about soft aspects. I call them soft aspects. And I'm talking about purposeful passion. I'm talking about inspiration. I'm talking about selflessness, boldness, and fidelity to a cause beyond our individual selves. And these are the building blocks of values-based leadership that you've demonstrated today. Our hearts and minds must be at the right place to catalyze the making of some difficult decisions we needed to ensure that the real estate industry justly transition towards net zero emissions. Through this timely event today that calls us to a race towards cutting emissions, BOMA Toronto has shown that indeed its heart is in the right place. Your consistency will be a source of motivation and inspiration to many other industries to follow across the entire world. Today, the world urgently needs a just transition that accelerates a net zero emissions pathway. And among the most important constituency to drive this just transition pathway is the real estate industry. In the circles of life, it happens that a unique challenge befalls one generation, which must be solved to guarantee the safe existence of future generations. Climate change is the challenge of our generation, and we have only 10 to 20 years within which to change course and guarantee both present and future generations. Let us therefore pull together and make just transition to net zero emissions a reality. This event today marks the beginning of that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bala. Thank you very much for the question on experiences from other parts of the world that are tackling emissions from building sector. If you take like Africa today, one of the pathways that many of the countries are taking is actually spearheading green buildings and ensuring especially the integration of clean energy, whether to power the heating systems as well as also power the water within the buildings. That is happening now, and that trend is happening mostly because if you look at countries that have actually ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement in what is called the nationally determined contributions, one of the aspects that is key, and most countries, 54 of them in the African continent, for example, they have clean energy as one of the actions for them to take. And in them, they have feed-in tariffs. And most of them have actually provided tax incentives. And building resilient infrastructure is actually a key aspect. And that has incentivized and created an enabling policy environment for actually the real estate actors and builders to then be able to seize these opportunities to start putting in place resilient buildings, as well as moving towards this pathway that can actually help to reduce emissions from buildings. So that is starting to happen because of the enabling policies that are in place, and people are seizing that opportunity to create businesses, and this is helping to lower emissions.
Thank you, Dr. Manang.